In Strategic Command, World War II, World at War, the Axis is probably the more interesting side to play if you're starting in 1939, because you start out with advanced technology, a good amount of troops. You don't have to manage as much, and you don't have to see half of what you control at the beginning, looking at Poland and France, get absolutely obliterated because the game's set up to have them be obliterated. There's a lot to think about and a lot to do when it comes to them, how to get started and how to plan for the long run. We're gonna go over how to get started and what you might want to look at. I've already made a video like this for the allies. It's in the playlist in the description along with other guides if you want to see that. But for now, let's get started talking about what we have in front of us. So, most of your action, especially your fast action, what most players will be looking at right here is Germany. At Germany, you have to start off with the invasion of Poland. Your troops are already in position, and you don't have the money to really do anything different here at the start. A lot of your early money is going to come from plundering. Your goal, essentially, is to take Warsaw as quick as possible, which will then force Poland to surrender pretty much immediately, especially if you're killing units on your way down. The goal, from what I've seen, is to get this done in 2 turns. Any more can be kind of bad. Earlier can be good, but it also stops some events from firing, which can also be bad. So 2 turns is generally what you want to go for. However, if you do miss that and it's 3, well, it doesn't really matter that much. If you're a player versus AI, you'll probably win anyway. You have access to some tactical bombers, fighters, medium bombers, and more tactical bombers and fighters that can support you. The units that reach Warsaw can come from either side, but I found it usually easier to reach them from the north, as all you have to do is blast through a half-dead army, a garrison, and then whatever lies on Warsaw, which usually sometimes gets changed. Sometimes it's just a garrison. However, you'll want to kill as much as possible, at least that's how I found. This part's pretty easy. I don't think I need to give a lot of advice. Just some general tips is your armies are better than corps. All the Polish units are generally pretty weak. Use tactical bombers before you attack with your land units. For the Germans, tanks already at the beginning get 2 attacks. So, for example, it can kill both of these cavalry immediately. A prepared attack when you are not moving, so if I just sit still and attack, is a heck of a lot stronger than a blitz attack, which is where I move first and then attack. So try to use prepared attacks. And with that, just, keep Warsaw in mind. These units will not be the ones to get there. It's either going to be these or these for you. And just go for it. You don't really need to attack too much further east, because you will get propositioned on whether to split the territory with the Soviet Union. Generally, I would advise doing this, because you will get pretty much constant MPPs from them until you declare war on them. And those MPPs, 25 a turn, I believe, are pretty damn useful. It doesn't come from them, it just gets kind of generated for you. So it's a pretty good idea, unless you have some other specific strategy, just generalize to accept splitting with the Soviet Union. It will help lower the Polish morale and ensure surrender in case you are running into any difficulties as a new player. Then, over on the left side, you don't have very much. You will start out engaged with France after the first turn. They'll pretty much join the war. You just need to kind of maintain your defenses over here. Armies are not needed for this. Corps are more than enough, because you're probably not going to be attacking France through the Maginot. Keeping these reinforced is good. You cannot upgrade when they're bordering enemies, so if you want to try to get any upgrades, the first turn's the time to do it. But there's a lot of other more important things to save up for. You also have some fighters over here. This mine's kind of an interesting one because it produces a lot of MPPs, 20. It's a lot for you at the very beginning. However, since it's surrounded by 2 enemies, it's not going to stay that way. It's going to lose strength over time because it's surrounded. I would advise against trying to defend this, even if, it's a risky proposition. The enemies will attack you, especially if they're AI, and you will not have the defenses here like you do just behind it. I would just forego those MPPs and just focus on finishing up Poland and then transferring as many units as possible to the west for as early of an invasion of the Low Countries as possible. If you want to wait through the winter, wait until the first turn where it's not snowing, that could be a good idea. That's what I like to do, because it gives me more time to upgrade my units, to start doing research. and then I can blitz through the Low Countries. You don't need to declare war on all of the Low Countries. The only one you need to declare war on really is Belgium to get into France. You could try going through the Maginot, but that's a terrible idea. You could try going through Switzerland, but I also wouldn't really recommend that. Anything ahistorical will draw the ire of other countries and maybe lead to things that are not really in your favor. Avoiding the Netherlands is something you could do if you want to keep America out of the war for longer. Same thing potentially with Luxembourg, but Belgium's the only one you really need to get through. So you want to move units from east to west, line up right here, and then get ready to attack. The more mobile you can make this, the better. The sooner France falls, the better. And then you will be prompted by another event. This event is whether you make Vichy France or not, assuming as well also, if you have Germany take this, make sure you have Germany take this. Italy will join the war. We'll talk about them in a moment, but you want Germany to take Paris. If Italy takes Paris, you will not get prompted for the Atlantic Wall. All this useful plunder and stuff will go to a nation that is really not very well off, and I'll talk about a comparison in a bit. You want the MPPs from the plunder from taking the capital for Germany. You want Germany to have control of this. Vichy France or not is really up to your strategy. If you go with Vichy France, then you'll kind of lose access to the southern mines and towns. It'll become this neutral Vichy entity that when the AI does Operation Torch, for example, you will just annex for free. Or if a player is your enemy, then it might be a little bit different. But if you make Vichy, it will potentially cement Spain as being neutral unless you go out of your way to make them like you. And it will finish off France. If you do not make Vichy, you will directly annex, or occupy anyway, all of France. And then France will then move their capital into Algeria, I believe. And then you will have to attack that to actually finish them off. Spain will absolutely love this, and it would make it a lot easier to get Spain to join pretty much for free. And diploing Spain is hard because you are limited to the amount of diplomatic chits you could put into them no matter what side you're on. So if you want to go with this strong Western Europe kind of idea, then you could go for just simply conquering all of France instead of making a Vichy entity. This would also make it a lot harder for the Allies to do an Operation Torch. Portugal does have a good chance of joining the Allies, so if you already own Spain, you could counter that pretty quickly or preemptively invade them pretty quickly, as well as conquer the Gibraltar, really solidifying the entrance into the Mediterranean. So if you want to solidify the entrance western into the Mediterranean and protect all this stuff, then this is a good idea to go for, but it is harder. As a newer player, I'd really recommend just going with Vichy instead, because then you could go a little more historically. You'll get prompted with other events like whether or not to occupy Denmark or Norway. This is like the cheapest way to get these done. So I would generally recommend occupying them, yes. And then you can modify the convoy routes, which is generally another thing I would recommend, unless you think you can somehow defend all of this from the Allies, which I don't personally think a new player would be really able to do. Finland is kind of a roll of the dice that's more up to the Allies than you whether or not you get them. But if you do go Vichy, you'll have the extra time to then prepare for the Soviets, a little bit extra, or, you know, you'll have to deal with Yugoslavia as well. Or prepare for an Operation Sea Lion. Operation Sea Lion is going to be a little bit more difficult. If you do want to prepare for an Operation Sea Lion, then you're going to want to definitely make sure that you kill the BEF that will spawn here. If the BEF is dead, then aside from the Home Guard, which will spawn, the Brits will be way more open to an Operation Sea Lion. And that's my advice for that. Staging a naval invasion is difficult. I actually recently posted a guide about naval invasions in this game, so I suggest you watch that if you are considering a sea lion. Otherwise, you need to prepare for the Soviet Union, Yugoslavia. That's pretty easy. If you pile up too much stuff in the east, then the Soviets will mobilize quicker, but realistically, if you are going for the Soviets, you want as early of an invasion as possible, ideally without the winter. Put as many stuff on the border as you think you possibly can, because you want to deal as much damage in the first turn as possible, because they actually start out debuffed, or more accurately, you start out buffed on the first turn, and everything that spawns on the border, because they will get free stuff on the border at the first turn of the war, you'll be able to destroy pretty quickly. And then you just want to go east as fast as possible. Russia's special, they won't die when Moscow falls. You'll have to take all three capitals and kill a lot of their units to really make them surrender. Caucasus oil, very important. The UK and Soviets should occupy Iran, which then leads you to Middle Eastern oil, and another front to potentially India and Egypt for your south. That is really, really useful. You want to probably aim for more than actually killing the Soviets, but killing them is important. Otherwise, you might be surprised by a D-Day. Germany is really the most in-depth one, which is why I'm going into such depth here. You'll get prompted for other little things like whether or not to annex Lithuania. Wouldn't really recommend that. Mobilizes the Soviets way too quick. And then just otherwise looking at other things. Diplomacy, well, what diplomacy might you want to do? You'll only have Germany and Japan at the start because Italy's not even in the war at the start, but they will join. They will join, and their importance is a lot lesser. There's a couple options for diplomacy. When it comes to a Germany-centric strategy, and you really do have to pick, getting Yugoslavia to join you before they get coup d'etat by the Brits is a really generally good idea to strengthen your front here and then make it so that you don't have to invade through and then really handle Greece as much. Especially if you could throw Turkey into that, then you get this giant Eastern European wall with Turkey that could go into the Middle East, and Turkey's strong. They join Germany as a minor, but they start out with a military that's really just equivalent to Italy, and they can make even more things as well. They just don't have as much access to money, but they can open a gateway to get to money, as well as opening another front against the Soviets. This is a lot harder to do if you're going for no Vichy. So this is kind of where you're picking between West and East as Germany. However, you might not have a strategy that's Germany-centric anyway, in which case there's other diplomacy options, which I'll go over when I look at the other countries, primarily Japan. When it comes to research as Germany, you start out with a lot of good things going. There's a lot of things you want to definitely have happen. Now, I've played more of the Axis than I've played of the Allies, so I've learned quite a lot. One thing that you might want to do, honestly, is cancel out this research on rocket weapons. You will get some MPPs back. The only rocket units I find that matter, they benefit from artillery weapons, so I would actually keep this, because artillery can be very useful to you as Germany. You can get a lot of artillery. There's a lot of other things you need. Rockets are very expensive. They exist kind of as strategic bombers that can't be intercepted, but it's a lot of money for each one, and the research to make them better is a lot, and their functionality does not align, in my experience, with how the manual says they should act. So yeah, I would maybe cancel that. You could also potentially cancel out anti-tank weapons as well. These can be useful, but as Germany, as everyone, you really have to pick and choose your strategy. An anti-tank has a long research tree that's expensive, and they're not actually that expensive. With Germany, you want to focus other things like infantry weapons. Infantry weapons need to be maxed as quick as possible, man. Advanced tanks, you want to definitely focus tanks for Germany, in my opinion. I would not let anti-tank get in your way if you could be getting tanks, which you'll need to buy. They're expensive, but they're very, very useful. Remember those 2 attacks they could get. Fighters, very important for Germany. Heavy bombers and naval weaponry are questionable. Really depends if what you plan on doing. Strategic bombing campaign over the UK, trying to make a sizable navy, very difficult. Same thing with naval warfare. It's questionable what you actually go for with this. This is more surface fleet oriented. Long range aircraft, very important. Amphibious warfare, mostly if you're going to do a sea line for a decisive victory. This can be put off till later if you want to do a later sea line. Ground attack weapons, very important. Germany's air force is integral to them. Arty can be useful, but the planes are what's going to allow you to dominate quite a lot, along with those infantry weapons and advanced tanks. The ASW, AA, those are a little more iffy. AA is a little bit more important. Your own subs matter quite a bit, definitely, so I'd go into that. Otherwise, these are all very important right here for Germany as well. And so that kind of covers Germany's introduction. I'm going to go the most in depth on them because I think they're going to be the focus of most players. Just get those subs out, you know, raid your enemy sea lanes no matter what you're doing, really. That's how you get started as Germany, and some decisions you can make for them early on. Any long-term strategy beyond like 1941, 1942 is going to be up to you. This is just what I'd recommend going into. There's a lot of options. Now, looking at Italy, there's not a lot of options. You don't even start out in the war. Your units aren't ready for war. You got to start reinforcing them early on. As Italy, you shouldn't really be looking at maxing out your research like with Germany, let's say, and even for diplomacy chits, you might not want to spend it all because your income is just that low. It's less than India, and India is hardly relevant in this game anyway in terms of overall military power. So what you get here is up to you. Now, an air force is really expensive, so whether you even keep the research in long-range aircraft, it's up to you. You do start with some planes it could be helpful for, and they're maybe is value in getting a couple more, but you don't have a lot of MPPs as Italy to do much of anything. Ground attack weapons, same thing. Good for your bombers, but can you afford your bombers? Questionable. Logistics is very important. However, the most important thing for Italy is going to be infantry weapons. Infantry warfare, and command and control. So you can have your HQs buffing up your infantry who have the max weapons, who have the max morale possible. That is the main thing, because that's what you're mostly going to be using as Italy, is infantry. Whether you have them assist the Germans, as is historical, whether you go into Greece or you go all in on Africa, which is actually what I prefer to do, it's up to that. You do have a navy, and it is kind of formidable, to be honest. You want to be careful with it, because it also can be slaughtered. And investing into it is hard. If you invest into an air force, your chances to afford a navy are going to be minimal. So personally, I would prefer to focus a navy over an air force for Italy. Maybe some maritime bombers. They can only get one anyway. Taking Malta, personally, if you go for it, should probably actually be done mostly by Germany and not Italy, because Germany has the MPPs and the power. Definitely if you go for Vichy, going for Malta is pretty good. Otherwise, your main goal as Italy is really just going to be to dominate Africa and survive, and not be a pain in the ass for Germany. You can go into Greece. It's very good for Italian morale to go into Greece. You get some free cores for doing it. But you do open a new front that can be problematic. If you go east heavy with Yugoslavia, Turkey, Germany, this could be very easy to get around. If you go west heavy, then Italy is a little more on their own. Germany can still bail them out later, but as a new player, you want to be careful, because if you get pushed into Albania from Greece, you're going to suffer a gigantic morale hit that makes the whole invasion really no longer worth it. And then that's really all Italy has for early events and strategies. They're not capable of very much. They kind of have to pick one area and focus on it in the long run. Because even if you give them Paris, which I would not recommend doing, they don't have the MPPs or income to really do anything useful anyway. So again, I wouldn't really try to focus too much as them. As both Italy and Germany, you will get prompted on whether to convert some battleships that are in production into carriers. I would personally not do these, because you're paying almost the price of another carrier for a carrier, whereas the battleship will just come free, and free ships are better than spending excessive amounts of money on conversions and then losing ships for these nations where MPPs is quite critical. Germany, if you play it well, will end up with more MPP income than your other two allies combined. Germany and Italy, your planning for them should be very much in tandem of how you tackle them. Italy could benefit definitely from some heavy artillery if you're purchasing any units for breaking some stalemates. Germany has a lot of different kinds of artillery. The rocket artillery, not the rockets, different, is the best artillery in the game, personally, just judging by the stats for, well, you know, attacking enemy units anyway, for example. So these are the best ones. If you want to get any, then heavy artillery. You'll get field artillery from Rommel. Whether or not you send Rommel, who will spawn here, you should get him, by the way, into Africa is up to you. Personally, I like to use him in Europe anyway. Paying for the transport is just kind of meh. I'd rather have Italy focus that anyway, because success in the Soviets means success in the Middle East, means success in Egypt, which is a decisive victory location anyway, no matter what. Italy, in my opinion, is pretty good at just picking up the slack anyway. Ethiopia is another weird thing for Italy, actually, because you get to choose whether to invest in them or Libya early on. You'll be asked to send things here, and if you don't, they'll kind of just appear around here. Against the AI, can you hold this? Sure, yeah, you can, but it's a very low supply hellhole where, you know, you'll be prompted to send an HQ here. If you're not careful, he could die very easily. Very, very easily, because you don't really stand a chance down here anyway. Sending them to Libya, I think, or back to the mainland is much better and actually kind of saves you money in the long run. Against an incompetent player or AI, then Ethiopia should honestly just live no matter what. But even if you lose it, it's 10 MPPs, which is a decent bid for Italy, but not that important compared to holding Libya, keeping the UK at bay, and allowing Germany the time to conquer, you know, the Soviets or pull off a sea lion and then make all this irrelevant. Because, you know, if the Soviets fall, then Germany can come in through here. If the UK falls, then this is no problem anyway, and Italy can just kind of dominate Africa. They're probably the best ones to do it anyway. Now, looking at Japan, Japan actually starts off very, very strong. they start off with more than China, and this is kind of their main domain. However, be careful. As Japan, you don't earn that much MPPs, especially in the beginning, and you will lose some to the DEI. Now, here's where my other diplomacy suggestion comes in, where I think as Japan, for example, it may be very useful to get the DEI to join you before the oil embargo goes into effect. That way you don't have to invade it. That way you don't lose the MPPs ever, and then you can pace your own invasion of America as you please and have more availability to invade other things. So if you go with any diplomacy at all, the Axis are not going to be as diplomacy heavy as the Allies, certainly. With Japan, you need to prepare for the war in the Pacific. You need to. A lot of special forces will be given to you for free, but you need to prepare your navy. You need to prepare a lot of things and a lot of invasions on specific timetables. And if you're not aggressive enough, if you're not fast enough, your chances to invade and take Australia, which is a decisive victory objective, are very slim. It is very tempting to just focus all of your MPPs into China and conquer it as quickly as possible. However, one thing you have to consider is China's not worth that many MPPs. They're really not. They're maybe almost equivalent to you at the start, but their research is dog shit. So looking at research as well, infantry weapons, again, for Japan, very important, as well as naval techs. Air techs are still pretty important for carriers and stuff, as are all these things. This is not like Italy where you shouldn't be doing research. In fact, you should be doing a lot of research as Japan. Almost as much, if not as much as Germany, even though you will be working with consistently less MPPs throughout the whole game. When Germany can get up to like 1,000 MPPs per turn, you'll be lucky if you're at 400 MPPs per turn. So it's very difficult. Command and control, very important as well. Amphibious warfare, extremely important for Japan, because you will need to fight over the Pacific. If you don't, America will come and steal your children, steal your wife, steal your homeland, and then what will you have left? Nothing. Just Germany besieged on all sides. So you really need to make a delicate kind of balancing act here. Very early on, I wouldn't blame you if you want to do a focus in China. It's actually pretty smart. If you can take Pakoi and, you know, around, just hold this region, for example, you'll be able to take Hanoi and Indochina via event, which will then get Thailand to join you for free, by the way. Which is why I don't recommend diploing anything over here except the DEI. And then that's just very important. So maybe sending like a free army or something over there to reinforce that. Taking Nanning's pretty useful as well. Chungking is important to take in the long run, but again, pace it. It doesn't need to fall any earlier than the Soviets or the UK. Realistically, China will never be doing that great. If you can take all the way to Kunming and Wanting, you can actually cut off the hump, which comes after the Burma Road, which comes after the Hanoi-Kunming rail line, which are things the Allies will get to do to send MPPs to China. And you do want to cut these things off, because for Hanoi-Kunming, the Allies are generating MPPs out of thin air. For the Burma Road, they are not out of thin air, but it is advantageous. The hump is just a one-to-one trade. If you can get over to Kunming Wanting, that's very important. So conquering the south, I'd say, pretty damn important early on. However, be careful how much you dedicate to this. A front against the Soviets, not very important, but you will get prompted of things to keep a unit within 1 hex of to stop the Soviets from mobilizing too quickly. Germany can kind of hold that by themselves. So while I would say conquering the south here is very important, it is also very important to focus on other things that you will need as well. Diplomacy, if you go into it, is a lot of MPPs. You'll need to prepare a defense of the DEI. It will be historically invaded by America. And players, you know, players will do a lot. You will want to invest in some kind of defense for the Pacific Islands, because the AI will historically invade it, and as will players. And honestly, if you're focusing on conquering China or weakening them as fast as possible, you're just not going to have the money to do this unless you just sacrifice all research, which is just going to fuck you over anyway. Realistically, the best thing you can afford is probably going to be garrisons, but you need garrisons in China because there's a lot of partisans. So a lot of what you might be purchasing are garrisons to handle these partisans, which, as you can see, there's an absolute fuck ton. So you might need to mix and match things a little bit. Cores are personally my go-to, but they are very expensive. 1 core is 3 garrisons. That's a lot. On a lot of these islands, a core would be absolutely immovable and unstoppable in comparison, like Majuro over here, and Eniwetok, Wake Island, and Midway if you take it. These 1 hex locations would be very hard for the enemy to really do anything about. Now, see, with Japan, though, a lot of this stuff is beyond 41. It's a little bit beyond getting started, which is why there's not as much to say about them. Japan starts out with one pretty easy to defeat enemy, and it's very easy to focus them down, but you want to think really long term and really manage your MPPs as Japan as well, because with Japan, you really can't afford to replace your losses once the end of 41, early 42 comes around. You got to figure out what kind of victory you're going for, how you want to accomplish it, especially as Japan. Germany can kind of just figure out a sea lion later. They have that leeway. Japan does not. You got to know how you're going to take Australia and India, who maybe could be taken by Germany instead. So you got to figure that stuff out early. And the more you focus on the Pacific earlier, getting it defended, getting units and things, naval units, etc., ready for it, at the detriment of going into China, the more prepared you'll be, because you can always come back to China later. However, again, taking up to Kunming, very useful, because you'll cut off all support the Allies could send into China. The hump itself is probably not so bad, so long as you take Rangoon and you hold this to take Hanoi, you could probably survive the hump just fine. MPPs in the hand of China is far less damaging to you than MPPs in the hand of America anyway, honestly. So while it may be difficult to not beat up China so much at the beginning, you really might want to consider just gradually going at them throughout the whole war. They don't have to die for you to win. They just have to lose Chongqing pretty much, and you just have to hold what you already have. So it's something to consider. This might just be something you leave as a long-term thing in the long run. Anything you purchase is really up to you. Again, you're not going to be able to afford very much. The maritime bombers you could get can be very useful. Special forces are already spoken for. Paratroops pretty much already spoken for. Garrisons, very expensive. HQs already spoken for. Later in the war, kamikazes, if you get this far. And then do just note, there are no events that's going to invade the Philippines for you. There are no events that's going to invade really any of this stuff for you, except for like Indochina and Thailand. So you got to prepare all of this stuff manually. And do remember, you'll get a bunch of free special forces later to make a lot of that happen. But no events will pop up to make any of this very much easier for you, especially in the beginning. However, that is every single nation and a lot of what I would recommend doing for them, a lot of what you have to look forward to. That is my getting started guide on the Axis. If you have any questions, feel free to leave those in the comments below. If you want to see any maybe strategy guides for the mid to long term, feel free to express that in the comments below as well. Again, this is part of a bigger playlist of guides you can check out in the playlist below. For now, though, thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.